All right. Well, wow. Good evening, everybody. Just say thank you for joining us again. This is another rendition of our Simsbury Let's Talk discussion that is brought to you by the Simsbury Spirit Council, as well as Simsbury Social Services, and of course the Simsbury Public Library. As the Simsbury Spirit Council, we have been challenged and answering the call to improve and work on diversity and inclusion in the town of Simsbury and the greater Hartford area. And so part of our approach in doing this has been the establishment of these monthly Let's Talk discussions. And so we had our first one in August, and now we are on our fifth one here in December. So we've had discussions on anti-racist versus non-racist. We've had a discussion on Hispanic Heritage Month. We've also had a discussion on living with disabilities in the Simsbury area. Then we've done Indigenous Peoples Month. And now our latest discussion is going to be on living with HIV and AIDS. And so we are very pleased to have some expert panelists, people who are able to just be able to broaden our capacity and understanding this topic, understanding the disease, and just allowing us to be a lot more educated, so we don't have to be walking around with so much bias. We don't have to have so much be held on by myth as well, but we will be able to hear real stories from real people, which I know will be able to break down a lot of our own mental and intellectual barriers and biases that we have on this topic. And so we are very, very fortunate for our panelists who have taken the time not only to prepare, but just taking the time to join us and to be able to tell their stories with us this evening. And so that being said, my name is Nkosi Lee. I'll be your moderator for this evening. I am the member of the Simsbury Spirit Council and also the chairperson of the events subcommittee, which has been charged with putting on these discussions. So we have with us Nicole, who's also a member of our subcommittee. I believe I saw it's Carol, you with us, and Sarah as well, and Lindsay. There's a host of us that are members of the committee. And so before we move forward, I just want to allow Nicole that she's going to also give some information regarding our discussion tonight. Thank you.
We just want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us. These conversations are a huge benefit, and our complexion and understanding of every issue that we encounter changes with every event. They're meaningful and they leave an impact. And so I think you're in for a treat this evening. Our panelists are incredible. I also want to let you know that the event is being recorded and it's on Facebook Live right now. And so if you're not comfortable with that, you can turn off your screen. If you want your 15 minutes of fame, leave it on. And the other thing is we'll be putting a chat in the chat feature. We're monitoring for questions and answers, but we'll be putting a survey link at the end. It's very brief and would love your feedback at the end of the event to help us continue these with your input. You're in for a treat. Here we go. Go ahead, Nkosi.
All right, so thank you. So I'm just gonna start off with some of the, reading some of the bios of the panelists that have taken the time out to join us this evening. So first panelist we have is Alice Nelson Ferguson, who is a peer navigator, the HRA Wellness Resource Center, New Britain, Connecticut. She's also a part of the Ryan White Planning Council, co-chair membership, priorities and needs assessment. She's the chair of the Bristol Task Force on HIV, AIDS, and Diversity Council, and also part of the Friends of Hands on Hartford Committee. For Alice, leadership is a platform that she uses to achieve the ultimate representation of her community, people living with HIV, AIDS. Alice leads by example, using her voice and a victory over years of trials, which are now memories, which form an arsenal of experiences and has afforded her a perspective that is useful in advocacy, education, and engagement of consumers and everyone interested in healthcare services overall. Alice is a 30 plus year survivor of AIDS who vigorously advocates in various capacities. She has served for 5 years as the chair of the Hartford Commission on HIV/AIDS. And this commission promoted programs that has enhanced the lives of people affected with HIV/AIDS by making recommendations to the mayor for specific activities, not within the scope of the Ryan White Planning Council. The Hartford TGA RWPC, that's the Ryan White Planning Council, there is an advisory council to the mayor, and it's designed to address HIV/AIDS issues, including education, gaps in services, emerging healthcare problems not addressed by existing programs, institutional barriers to service, delivery operations, and weaknesses or conflicts relative to the HIV/AIDS community. So that is our intro. So let us welcome Alice Nelson Ferguson, and thank you again for joining us tonight. Next, we have Barbara A. Shaw, who is a LCSW, which was a social worker. Please tell me, LC is
licensed clinical social worker.
Thank you, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you, Barbara. And she's executive director of Hands on Hartford. She's a veteran social worker with more than 35 years of experience working collaboratively with others to plan, provide, and evaluate services with and for individuals and families affected by poverty, homelessness, HIV/AIDS, complex health conditions, mental illness, and substance use. Barbara is deeply committed to ensuring that the agency serves neighbors responsibly and impactfully while engaging volunteers and connecting communities from the Hands on Hartford Center for Community in the Parkville neighborhood. She was director of programs at Hands on Hartford from 2002 to 2010 and was named executive director in 2011. Prior to that, she worked for 15 years at two other community nonprofit organizations in Hartford in executive leadership positions. She earned her BSW and MSW degrees in social work from Western New England College and the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, respectively, and received her license in clinical social work in 1998. Barbara is a longtime resident of Hartford, appreciating the fact that she lives, works, worships, and more, all within a 2-mile radius in the city she loves. Thank you for joining us also, Barbara A. Shaw. Next, this is our first returnee as a panelist. So this is Louis Angel Irizzary. And Louis Angel Irizzary is a community health and wellness manager at CRT. He's been at CRT for almost 2 years and has been working in the social service field for over 25 years. He has primarily focused his efforts within the LGBTQ plus, people of color communities, and with any level of disenfranchised groups. Louis began his career as an outreach worker at the age of 18 at CHC, that's the Children's Home of Cromwell in Middletown, and from there expanded my knowledge in all areas of HIV prevention. He then moved and lived in New York for 18 years and was able to expand his career and develop programs at the Gay Men's Health Crisis, Colin Lord Health Center, Bellevue Hospital, and in health insurance and special needs plans. Louis is a proud 44-year-old Puerto Rican, gay, HIV positive, spiritual male living a healthy life and continues to work hard, not just on a professional level, but in his personal life by volunteering on Hartford Pride committees and issues that are dear to him. His life experiences growing up as a Hispanic male in a single mother household. He has personally experienced the disparities that exist for his people and for a single Latina woman, which influenced him to pursue and work in public health. As a face of the community, Louis has been able to connect and establish bonds and relationships with community members in addressing their needs. Louis is a proud Puerto Rican because he feels the pride and struggles of his ancestors before him, and they run through his veins. He's lived in Puerto Rico for almost 2 years as a child And that gave him the opportunity to live amongst his people and experience his cultural and the beautiful island firsthand. There's an unspoken and unbreakable bond with the music, food, culture, people, and there's resilience despite all the obstacles that we have faced, says Lewis. So let us also welcome Lewis Irizzary tonight as a panelist for our discussion. Okay, next we have Latoya Tyson. Latoya Tyson is the current director of harm reduction and prevention at AIDS Connecticut Incorporated, which is also known as ACT in Hartford, Connecticut. ACT is a community-based organization whose mission, along with collaborating partners, is to increase Connecticut's capacity to ensure that all people impacted by HIV, AIDS, and related health issues have access to health, housing, and support services. Latoya has worked for the organization for over 10 years. In her current role, Latoya oversees the administrative operations of ACT's prevention department, which consists of sexual health, syringe services, and the community distribution center. In addition to administrative responsibilities, Latoya is DPH certified and conducts HIV, HCV counseling and testing, provides HIV, HCV, STI, safer sex education presentations, tables, health fairs, conferences, and facilitates both sexual health and OD prevention trainings and conducts distribution of naloxone. Latoya holds DPH certifications in STI counseling and testing via urine and phlebotomy, and effective behavioral interventions such as testing together, drug user health, motivational interviewing, CLEAR, and SISTA. Latoya has undergone training to utilize social network strategies, how to expand PrEP access, and how to provide services to diverse groups, including trans women, MSM of color, aging HIV plus individuals, and those who have experienced sexual and domestic violence. Latoya is fluent in Spanish as well. And so let us also welcome Latoya Tyson as another awesome panelist for us in our discussion this evening. Okay, next we have John Merz, and he is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Advancing Connecticut Together, a statewide multi-pronged social service and advocacy agency. The agency has 3 divisions, one of which is AIDS Connecticut, dedicated to ensuring that all people impacted by HIV, AIDS, and related health issues have access to health, housing, and support services. John holds a master's in divinity from Yale University Divinity School and an MBA from the University of Connecticut. He lives in Simsbury with his husband and has a house full of pets. Amen. Thank you. And let's welcome John to our discussion as well. Thank you, John, for taking the time to join us. Next, we have Ashley Sepulveda. She is also as a panelist joining us tonight. Thank you again for taking the time. Ashley Marie Sepulveda, she's 29 years old. She was diagnosed with HIV on her 6th birthday. She was taken from her mom when she was 10 years old because of neglect and abuse. Ashley remembers when her sisters and her were taken, and her sister were put together, and she said, and she was separated from them due to the stigma of her having HIV and people being so afraid of it. She was the only one in the foster home, and she couldn't handle all of her life. So she was left as a child. She lived her life as a child to the state. She was in residentials and in and out of hospitals and in and out of group homes because all she ever wanted was for my mother to love her, and she never did and never showed it. Ashley was 12 years old when she found out she had HIV, and a doctor sat her down and told her at 13 years old, she told her first girlfriend, and she shared it around, and it was hard to understand why people would do that and behave the way they did. After that, Ashley experienced depression. She started to cut herself and tried to kill herself multiple times. At the age of 19, she met her ex-husband and his brother, who worked at a residential that she lived in, and found out his brother was with her and told his whole family that she was HIV positive. My ex-husband denied it to his family, but I told him I had HIV because he didn't want to lose his family. His own mother told him he was sleeping with the devil and that if he wanted to die. Actually still stayed with him, and in 2011 they were married. 3 years after that, and they had their first daughter, and still the stigma followed her with their youngest daughter, and she's going to get it from her ex-husband's mother. 22 months after that she had her son, she was diagnosed with autism. In 2019, Ashley was divorced, and at that point she said she knew her worth then. And in 2012, I came out to the world about her condition and that she loved just being herself. Today, Ashley is 29 years old. She's a single mother, raising two amazing kids that God has blessed her with while making sure she takes care of herself. Today, Ashley can proudly say that her daughter and son are HIV negative, and so is her ex-husband. Her mother has 6 kids, all from different fathers. She is the 4th oldest of all of her mother's children. She has 2 little sisters who are HIV negative. And she said it's crazy about how her mom found out she had HIV when she had her last sister. So that is Ashley Sepulveda, and we thank you. That sounds like there's a tremendous experiences and a lot of life lessons, a wealth of experience in all these bios and all the knowledge that you all have. And so we, again, thank you for taking the time to join us and taking the time to share part of your stories and part of your expertise that you have in this area. And so we're gonna move forward with our program for this evening. And so we're just gonna work, and we're gonna work with our first question that we have here. And it says, can you give us a brief overview of HIV in the US? And what are some key terms we should understand as we talk about HIV? And so I'm gonna pass the floor over to John Merz, and he will give us some information to help us answer these questions and to kick this discussion off. So thank you, John, you have the floor.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Just so happy to be here. And rather than give you a sort of dry, boring history lesson, I want to do it in the context of story. And so our story begins in 1983 with a young gay white man. He's born and raised in the cornfields of Ohio, and he makes his way to New Haven to start graduate school. He's naive. But one weekend, he discovers a neighborhood in New York City called Greenwich Village, an oasis for gay men, a safe space where he finally sees himself. He sees men holding hands and kissing. He comes to understand that casual sex is common. What he doesn't appreciate is the fact that he's living in the later days of the sexual revolution. What was started in the 1960s with counterculture and questioning the man, with the development of birth control and legalization of abortion, a time where every known sexually disease was treatable. So this is the backdrop of his sexual awakening in 1983. Let it all hang out, baby. Now, he's not aware that 2 years earlier, 1981, a handful of gay men in Los Angeles came down with a rare lung infection called PCP, or that men in California and New York City were diagnosed with an unusually aggressive cancer named Kaposi sarcoma, or that people who injected substances also came down with PCP at the end of that year. And you know, even if he had heard the news that by the end of the year 1981, that there were 270 reported cases of severe immune deficiency among gay men, and that 121 of them had died, it would not have made an impact on him, as at that point in time, he was still living on his Ohio college campus. In the closet, as they say, he had never heard of gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID, as the disease was coined in mid-1982. It was mysteriously also affecting hemophiliacs and Haitians, or that by the fall of that year, the CDC had finally come up with an official name, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, a collection of diseases that affected the immune system caused by a virus known as HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. The first known case, he will later learn, was from 1959, as they discovered a blood sample from a man who had died that year. Or that he would later know that the first known case in the United States was 1969, again determined 18 years after the young man died, and his remains were tested with HIV virus in the system. But now it's 1983, and he's just exploring his sexuality and learning that life is good. But televangelist Jerry Falwell is spouting, AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexual, it's God's punishment for the society that tolerates homosexuals. And he wonders why no one is doing anything except blaming the gays. Where's the government? Why is it that only volunteers are helping one another? And so he looks around and starts to become aware of the realities of the community's response. Compassionate men and women. He hears of a group of volunteers that has formed an organization called AIDS Project New Haven, and that there are these volunteer AIDS projects springing up all over the country. The Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York City was founded in the living room of just one guy and his buddies. That Gay Men's Health Crisis is only a year old at that time, but becomes the model for education and support, creating buddies who would assist the mostly men and some women living with AIDS with chores and shopping and companionship, since most were estranged from their families because they were gay. Again, 1983, not very progressive when it comes to understanding people's sexuality. So he's in grad school and needs a work study placement, and they agreed to let him volunteer at AIDS Project New Haven. And he goes to a clinic designated for people with AIDS every Monday at Yale New Haven Hospital. And he learns very quickly that it's not just gay white men, but women and people of all races and ethnicities are becoming infected with this disease. And he hands out a simple brochure. There's only one brochure that the volunteer group knows of that was created by a counselor in New York. Now, while he's in grad school, he's busy, but he wishes that he could have joined the 100,000 lesbians and gays who marched at the Democratic Convention to demand an increase in federal AIDS funding. 2 years go by, and it's now 1985. AIDS Project Hartford in Hartford is founded, where Latoya and this young man worked. 14-year-old Ryan White, who we know has become the poster child, 14 years old, he's barred from school because he has AIDS. The government isn't doing enough. It's 4 years into the pandemic and 4 years into his presidency when President Ronald Reagan, a celebrity turned president, finally mentions AIDS. And it is only in response to a reporter's question. That same very day, Reagan's close friend and Hollywood royalty, Rock Hudson, dies from the very disease whose name he would not mention. And yet his vice president, Bush, calls for mandatory HIV testing, and 20 states introduced bills to ban people living with AIDS from food handling and educational jobs. And he wants to force testing on sex workers. There's anger, but also exhaustion and immense sadness. People are contracting the disease and many are dying, and there is no treatment. And so the AIDS Memorial Quilt is started in San Francisco. It captures the pain and loss of the epidemic. When the quilt is first displayed in Washington, D.C. 2 years later, 1987, it takes up the space larger than a football field and contains 1,900 panels. He will learn that it will eventually grow to more than 48,000 panels dedicated to more than 100,000 individuals, and that is a mere fraction of those who have died from AIDS in the United States, and an even smaller fraction of those who have died globally. He will have to wait until 1996 for the White House to finally announce its first ever AIDS strategy. Then President Bill Clinton says, none of us can afford to sit by and watch this epidemic continue to take our neighbors, friends, and loved ones. And yet it is this same president who refuses to lift the ban on the use of federal funds for syringe purchases. That ban continues to this day. And so the work continues. And that young man becomes the head of AIDS Project Hartford, now known as Advancing Connecticut Together. Yours truly, who is no longer a young man, but that is how I started my roots in this field and grew up with the history that is so important for all of us to understand. And with that, I'll turn it back to the moderator.
Yes, thank you, John, just for obviously giving your perspective, your experience, and even the mental state, perhaps, of growing up and coming up through the 1980s and such. And so your perspective on the government handling on HIV, just how things were done. It's, again, it's not a discussion. It's not a topic that we get to hear too much of, especially from a firsthand account. So again, thank you very much for sharing, your experience from all that has happened. Thank you. Next, also to just to give some of her experience on the same topic, we have Alice Nelson Ferguson. She also has some to share and answering about a brief overview in the history of HIV in the United States.
Hi, I'd just like to give some perspective. Imagine all the people living in fear, something akin to the fear that we're experiencing today with COVID. The population that is largely in fear right now are people over 65. The population John spoke of that were largely in fear were gay men. But I just wanted to share just briefly, there was another population that I belonged to, and that was women. I was diagnosed in 1989, and even I had no idea what AIDS, and I was diagnosed with AIDS, not HIV. And I went into denial immediately because I, like everyone else, wait a minute, they say it's a gay man's disease. So how could I get it? All right, drugs? No, I don't do drugs. Gay man, I've been married for 10 years. So no, my husband isn't gay. We've been married for 10 years. And tell him, what can I say to him? I'm just not going to say anything. 6 months later, my husband was dead. I'm just going to leave that there and turn the conversation back over to the moderator, and I'll share more later. Thanks.
Okay, yes, thank you, Alice, for sharing. And like we say, and the more perspectives we get, we're able to learn from and it helps to destroy myths. It helps to destroy stereotypes, and it allows us to learn. And then you can hear people's stories and the real components about it. Just what you're about to share there. It's engaging, and I know, what do you say? So thank you for sharing. I know it just can't always be, easy to share. So thank you for taking the time to do that. John, you as well. Thank you for sharing your experience, sharing your perspective, as well as growing up in the 1980s, when this is blowing up, I guess you can say, in our country and throughout the world as well. So thank you. All right. So thank you again for sharing. So another question that we have is how does the fact that HIV/AIDS is not a part of mainstream discussion in our society impact education and awareness? Do people still have a desire to hear about HIV and AIDS in 2020 going into 2021? And so that is our next question that is out there. So please feel free, as any of our panelists, to join in to answer the question.
I like to add a little bit with that question myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Louis. I think that we're in a generation now that, unfortunately, because HIV has been around for X amount of years already, that the new population, younger generation, and because of the advancement of medications, people are living longer and living healthier. And so we're not hearing of so much of the deaths and those large numbers that were presented earlier in the early 80s. Also, another component being PrEP medication, pre-exposure prophylactics, which are, people take a pill a day and they think that now that can sort of protect them from HIV, which it does, is very effective, but it's not 100%. And so they also avoid and forget the other STDs, the other risk factors, hepatitis C, et cetera. And so you find a lot of the new generations now that just don't consider it to be such a big topic. It's not discussed as much. And so it becomes difficult, especially for people like us who work in the field, to have to really remind people that it's still present and it's still important to educate yourself, and that although there are medications available, is not an easy plight as people may think, that, oh, it's just one pill a day. But there are side effects to those pills. There's still the stigma that exists with HIV, et cetera. So that's what I would probably add to that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Louis, for sharing. Yes, I could definitely say, if someone engaged in social media, TV, as whatever it may be, all the mediums that we have for the exchange of information, this is not a big topic, so much anymore. So you're right, it's not much of a discussion, but as we are now finding out, it's still very real. It is still, amongst us. And often that's how things are able to expand and even to grow, when there is that lack of knowledge and that lack of understanding, the lack of care, and that is necessary for a disease that is still out here and it is still within our society. And as we're finding, there is no description, a set description of who is able to attract or to acquire or to become infected with the HIV/AIDS. So thank you all for sharing that as well. All right. So yes, who else would like to add in on that? Latoya, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I just want to piggyback on what Louis just said. So I think also part of the equation is the fact that there's so many people who don't think that HIV really exists anymore because they don't hear about it. So since it's not in mainstream, there are specific populations that, like the MSM, which is the men who have sex with men community, the LGBTQI plus community, who have heard and have been inundated with messages about HIV and protection and all that stuff. And then there are other communities, like the Black community, that haven't. And, so there's a lot of discrepancy and disparity on who's receiving information versus who's not receiving information. And so people tend to have this misconception that because they're not hearing about it on a regular basis, that, oh, it just doesn't exist anymore. People don't get infected anymore. Clearly we've got this under control. And there's some merit to that in the sense that the medications and the advancements in medications, as Louis mentioned, the pre-exposure prophylaxis, there's also post-exposure prophylaxis, the medications for treatment, the advancements are so much better than they were at the onset, that the control and the management of HIV for people who are already infected is much better. However, people are, there are still, based on our numbers that we get, there are still anywhere between 40 to 50,000 people every single year, 30 plus years later from when we first learned about HIV, that are still being newly infected.
Wow.
Newly infected. So because mainstream is not really addressing it the way it used to, there are not the ads out there anymore. I'm a product of the, late 80s. I was a young person, and there were commercials, there were billboards, there were ads on buses. Like everywhere you looked, there was information on HIV and keeping safe and staying protected. And since there is none of that anymore, people tend to think that it doesn't exist. And that's where it's really a disservice, because as someone who does testing, I get people coming in all the time who need to get tested. And some people don't even realize the risks that they are putting themselves at, or that other people have put them at based on their behavior. So.
All right. Thank you, Latoya. Alice, you wish to add in as well? Yeah, you're on mute though.
Okay.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah, I did want to say, for all of us on the panel, one major frustration is we educate on HIV and AIDS, and the newer generation, they're getting their information from the internet and other sources, and the information they're getting is not valid. The information they're getting is it's not useful. So that's a frustration for a lot of us. The other thing is, years ago, churches had AIDS ministries, Catholic charities. The Balm of Gilead had vibrant ministries that were like overflowing with donations who would back off. The other thing is, every crisis that comes up pushes HIV and AIDS to a back burner. The opioid crisis pushed it back. COVID-19 pushed it back. I see in the chat there was a question that, is it a frustration that there is now a vaccine due to come in for COVID and not one for HIV and AIDS? No, it is not at all a frustration, in my opinion. Any vaccine that comes up for anything, any health crisis, is a blessing. The advancements in medication for HIV and AIDS has been a blessing. Researchers have never stop when it comes to HIV and AIDS. And it's only a blessing that those of us who are long-term survivors have lived to see this day. So we couldn't be anything but gracious and thankful for the advances. So there's no comparison. My disease, your disease, no, none whatsoever. The other thing is HIV and COVID are two different strains of virus. HIV mutates, and that's why finding a vaccine is that much more difficult. COVID is, I'm going to say, easier, but it's less of a challenge for scientists. So that's the answer as far as why they were able to find a vaccine for COVID. People with HIV, our immune system is compromised. So we have to protect, like, protect more so than anything else. So we educate our community to protect yourself. All the guidelines that are put out as far as masks and washing your hands, oh, that is absolutely taught to all of our community as a first line defense. Because when they talk about compromise or secondary conditions, we are one of those. Elderly, that's a condition. We have a compromised immune system. So it's critically important that people with the virus follow those guidelines.
In closing, may I add one little thing on top of what Alice said, and it'll be quick.
No, go ahead, Latoya, no problem.
It's in relation to finding a vaccine, and Alice is 100% right. I just wanted to add that it's also challenging for HIV because HIV, the RNA or the genetic material of the HIV actually binds itself to the DNA of the individual, so of the host. So that makes it also very challenging to find a vaccine because the DNA of every single individual, even people who are related, is extremely distinct from each other.
Wow.
So because HIV does that versus other infections and viruses that get into your body that are there and they're taking up space, but they don't become a part of you and a part of what makes you you. Wow. It's easier to be able to find a vaccine and to get rid of those because generally vaccines are produced from live virus. So imagine trying to infect someone with live HIV in order to eliminate them from HIV. Whoa.
Yeah. Wow.
I have something to add.
Yes, I'm sorry. Who's that? Let me.
Ashley.
Okay, yes, Ashley, go ahead.
I wanted to also answer with that as well. Would I take if there was a vaccine? No, not at all. I'm about to be 30 in June, and my desire to get cured and all of that, before, if you would have asked me when I was younger, like maybe in my teens, I would have had said yes. But now I'm in my 30s. I have two beautiful, healthy kids, negative. No, this is my life. This is who I am. And I'm going to live forever. I've been living, like they said, since I was 6 years old, this is my life. And I have a purpose for why I have this, and it's to educate others. It's also to save other people's lives, young people. What I've noticed as well is that in schools, they don't do sex ed like they used to when I was in high school. That's what's most important, to save our youths. Our youth are, we're important as well. But it starts with our youth as well, to save them so it doesn't keep spreading. Um, that really saddens me a lot that they took sex ed. I just spoke to a kid who is about to be 16 years old, and he didn't know what an STD is. He doesn't know what an STD is because they've never talked to him about it. Um, I had asked him before, do you know what an HIV person looks like? He goes, no. Do you know what HIV is? He goes, no. I was like, you're standing right in front of one who lives with it. He goes, oh, really? You don't look sick. I take care of myself. You have to take care of yourself in order to keep up with yourself. You know, like I told him, if you take care of yourself, you use a condom, you speak to your mom. I feel like it's very important. I feel like I grew up in a setting where we couldn't go to our moms and talk about sex. We couldn't not even mention the word sex to our parents because either we would have get an ass beaten or you know, we would have been frowned upon on, you know. So I just feel like us as parents is very important to educate our kids, especially when they are ready to have sex, you know, and teach them how to use a condom, you know, to protect themselves, because not only is there HIV out there, there's other STDs, you know, that we also got to educate them on.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Ashley, as well. I think too, it kind of goes back also a little bit to what Alice was saying about now people are being educated via the internet. You know, you could get some info from Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you know, the site is. And 9 times out of 10, as you're saying, Alice, the information is false. It's not even correct. And so then you could walk away listening to Lord knows who, and then you walk away with the whole false presumption about something that, you know, is very real and something that really does has the power, you know, to take your life, or has the power to really inhibit, you know, your quality of life. And this is something that can happen at a young age. So I thank you, Ashley, just because from your perspective, you know, and how do you talk to your parents about certain things? Are you able to? And these are all things. And so when you can't have these conversations at home from a trusted source, then you're going to hear it from someone else that just might be wanting, you know, have their own agenda or such. So yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that as well. So is there any one else from our panelists who wishes to add to the part we're talking about? How does the lack of the mainstream discussion of HIV or AIDS, how is that impacting the ability to educate? Or are we okay with that question, with the topic now?
I'm good with that, but I do see a question in the chat.
Okay.
That's kind of around what we're discussing. Do you mind if I answer that?
Yeah, no problem. Just please state the question first, yes, and then answer yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the question is, do you think that the misperception that HIV mostly affects disenfranchised communities has been the reason why you no longer see HIV/AIDS information education in the mainstream media and slow progress in medical advancements? So firstly, it's not necessarily a misperception because HIV does very much disproportionately affect communities of color. And that's across the board. You're talking Black community, you're talking about Hispanics, you're talking about Pacific Islanders, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Like, the virus does disproportionately affect those communities. Could that potentially be a reason why? Absolutely, because racism is a real thing. Let's keep this 100. It's a real thing, and it's extremely systematic. It is woven and literally interwoven in everything in this country, and how this country was founded and how it functions, how everything moves. So when there are infections, diseases, or what have you, and other issues that affect what is not necessarily considered the norm, or people that are of a population that is considered the the general population and the normal versus the other, then there does tend to be less emphasis on it until it comes back full circle. And the slowness in progressiveness in medical advancements, the truth of the matter is that, you know, when the 80s, the folks that were out, the volunteers that John talked about, the protesters, the folks that were out there beating the pavement, they only got things done because they pushed limits, and they pushed limits beyond the boundaries. Things only got done because people that those particular populations that were disenfranchised said, we are tired of this community acting like we don't exist. And we are tired of you allowing us to just die because you think that somehow there's something wrong with us. And so without them making those moves, nothing would have changed. But you also have to look at who that also affected to make the change. They were predominantly gay white men. And when white men speak, stuff starts to move. Because I can talk all day. Ashley can talk all day. Lewis can talk all day. And Kosi, we can talk all day.
I just gotta add, please. I know we got a whole program, but I just have to add, I cut my advocate teeth on white gay men. That's who taught me everything I know. They built the first wellness center on Broad Street, and they are who made me who I am. The answer to the question in the chat, healthcare equity, there is none. That is the answer to why HIV, COVID, every other issue that comes down the line that affects the minority community disproportionately. Why? Because equity does not exist. Okay, I'm done now. Sorry.
Well, you just got into the next question that just came up into the chat, because the next question that came up is, does it affect communities of color disproportionately because of lack of good healthcare where they live? Lack of good healthcare, yes. Lack of access to good healthcare, implicit bias through the healthcare system. So, you know, we're not necessarily looked at, you know, folks of color are not necessarily looked at as having as much pain as they profess. You know, they're thought to not need the same amount of care as, you know, other communities. So there are different factors, I think, that go into that.
It doesn't matter, because if you're in pain as a Black person, don't come in the emergency room asking for painkiller, because you're not going to get it. Period, point blank. What? You want it because you might want a drug.
Yes.
You can't be in pain. I had a foot ulcer for a year. I had to be drug tested to get painkiller for a foot ulcer. Doctors are freaked out about prescribing medication for pain. That is a direct result from the opioid crisis. Had nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with my issue. Was a direct result of a totally separate issue, but I could not get painkiller because of that. Keep me on. Sorry.
Right.
Oh, sorry. We are deviating. Sorry.
No, but I believe it's all, you know, it's all interconnected though. When you're dealing with issues of healthcare, you're dealing with issues of education. We talk about, the various issues of how we measure quality of life in America and the role that race plays in our ability to access and to live with the same quality of life with all racial groups within our country. And so it continues to resurface, right? So in every topic of conversation that we have had, this continues to come back around. So it's not off of topic at all, but it's a part. It feeds the medical inequality, the disparities in healthcare, the qualities of life, and all of that. It does come back a lot to our racial differences within this country. So it's okay that is spoken, because often it is left unspoken. And that's how, in dealing with any situation, any crisis, you have to address it. It has to be spoken on in order further, again, to be able to move forward with the issue. So thank you. You don't have to apologize. You're not deviating. That is perfectly well suited for our conversation that is going on this evening. We also have.
I just wanted to offer, I've checked with the library. This conversation is so good, and we have so much good stuff yet to come. We want to not rush you, and we can take until 8:30 if you're available. So we just wanted to honor the importance of what we're talking about.
We get an extra half hour of grace period.
Yes.
You guys are awesome.
That is built in. And every
The virus deserves that.
We have needed that extra
Exactly.
half hour of grace. Who does not need grace, right? And so
Amen.
we get it, every time. So I still want to keep moving forward, because I know there is so much information that is ready to be shared for our discussion. And so, in moving forward, we just have questions. I know there's some prepared statistics and data to also help, because we get the anecdotal, the qualitative data, and now we get some of the quantitative data as well. And it all comes together, right, to make this all the more real. And so that goes with a question of, where do we now stand with the HIV in the US, in Connecticut, and it says even in Simsbury. So I know that we have some data to come forward to help us with this question. So I am going to allow, I think, Nicole, you're gonna use the slide that we have, and who's gonna narrate the information?
It's Barbara.
Lindsay was going to share, and Barbara's going to.
Okay, Linda's got, and so Barbara is next. Thank you, Barbara, and we'll hear just how the information goes. Okay.
Absolutely. So this is for all those data geeks out there. You know who you are. And to be candid, on a more somber note, I think what you're going to see here is some illustration of exactly what my colleagues are speaking to. So if we go on to the first page of this, I want to just mention that really quickly, because it's not really on these slides, but just to kind of put this in perspective, since the early 1980s, almost 750,000 people in the US have lost their lives to HIV and AIDS. That's, almost 750,000 people. That is a heck of a lot of people, right? Men, women, kids, friends, family, community members, lovers, partners. It's pretty sobering. And across the world, 33 million people. I have to confess, I had lost track of both of those statistics, and was watching the news the other day on World AIDS Day on Tuesday, and was just once again kind of blown away and saddened by that. So certainly in the US, if you want to go to the next slide, Lindsay, in the US, and these are stats on this slide from 2018, we have a little over 1 million people that we know of living with HIV in the country. One of the difficult pieces about this lack of attention to HIV these days is that we know there are many people out there who have not been diagnosed. And as Latoya mentioned earlier, we have somewhere between this number and up to 50,000 even of folks diagnosed even today, knowing everything we know, and even with PrEP, right? It's really staggering. And again, just this idea that there are folks out there who haven't been diagnosed and haven't received the attention. I know when we were speaking about Black women and other women of color, and probably men too, although I think women in particular get particularly pathologized at the doctors, right? One of my closest friends nearly died of AIDS a couple of years ago. And she's a Black woman in the South who was poo-pooed for the health conditions that she was facing and bringing to her doctor until she nearly died, and finally was diagnosed and is alive today, but her life was completely leveled, and it's been incredibly painful for her and her family. But it's too often a sad story, and it's a sad story we hear a lot of in Black and other people of color. When we think about this proof of what we're talking about, right? So while you know, 3/4 of the men in this country are people living with HIV are men, and 1/4 are women, we start to see more women involved when we start talking about Black women in particular. These race statistics, I think, are disturbing, probably isn't even the right word, but so you see 40% of folks living with HIV in this country are Black people. Well, just to remind us, only 13.4% of the US population are Black. So that kind of speaks volumes. And conversely, white folks account for 29%, and yet the population is 60% white across the country. Certainly, it was emphasized earlier, the points about, or originally this pandemic struck the gay community, gay white men community, especially hard. It still is striking those communities hard, but with an increased number of people of color. And also heterosexual Black women and Black men who, again, as we mentioned, just simply aren't getting the attention, the education, the prevention, serious treatment, and so forth. So if we want to go to the next slide, we'll just sort of bring it a touch closer to home in Connecticut with 10,500 folks living with HIV. And here we have more women proportionately living with the virus. But again, still the serious racial discrepancies or disparities in Connecticut, where Black folks are 33% are represented of people living with HIV, and then compared to the overall population of 12% Black in Connecticut. And then just unbelievably, the Hispanic Latinx community, almost 35% of folks living with HIV in this state are our neighbors who are Hispanic Latinx, compared to the overall population of only 17%. So it goes on and on. If we turn the page, I'll just comment very quickly on the Hartford County statistics, where we see an even greater discrepancy of around Hispanic folks. And we certainly know that way more education, healthcare, and support is needed there as well. About a little over 3,000 people in Hartford County living with HIV. And then I know you're all wondering about Simsbury, although perhaps you've looked it up yourself in advance of today's forum, but you don't have that many folks living in Simsbury. But if for some of you out there who thought we probably have 1 or 2 people living with HIV in Simsbury, no, you have 18 people at this last count back in 2019. And since the early 80s, 36 people that are known of. And of course, those are greater than some of the communities in surrounding you, but far less than in Hartford. If we want to turn the page for all of you data geeks who didn't get enough in my quick tour, in interest of time, there's all kinds of places that you can go to get more statistics, data, and you can do it to your heart's content. And I think what you'll find is it is a fascinating and disturbing representation of what we've seen over the decades with this pandemic, and with the health disparities as well. So that's it for me on statistics.
Yes, thank you for sharing, Barbara, with some of the statistics there. Now, I would bet you to answer, what you said about, perhaps people living in Simsbury or any of the suburbs, as far as people living with HIV, and probably part of our implicit bias of when we think of things, we would definitely say that number is, like non-existent, 0, 1. Of course, there's nobody, up in, that area living with HIV or AIDS. But, it definitely goes to tell the story that, a disease, a virus, it does not discriminate, and it can and will infect anybody, if you're not taking those necessary precautions. And so you can ask, what does a person with HIV look like? You don't know, right? It can be anyone. What does a criminal look like? It can be anyone, but we definitely have some images and perceptions made up in our minds about who is more likely to have it, and what does an individual look like, and what kind of care should they get as a result of who they are. So thank you again, for sharing. Yes, Latoya, I see you have your hand up.
And this is in relation to Barbara's statistics. So what most people don't know is that the numbers that we get and that we have access to we are able to access directly from the Department of Public Health, but that is for agencies that actually have to report their positive results to the Department of Public Health. Because if you have a private physician, they are not mandated to report their HIV numbers to the state. So for these smaller towns in which people may be way more reluctant to want other people to know their status, they're not going to go to a clinic or to any type of medical facility in which that requirement is mandated. Those places typically are found in communities where there is a very high influx of people of color.
Right. And then we become mandated reporters, so the information has to be put out there. Okay, definitely didn't know that part as well.
Because they're funded, that's why.
Right. What government funds. All right. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. And so we've had some, some personal stories. Now we've been given, a little bit of data, and I think that's what probably makes you guys a very formidable panel, is that the data, the information is going to come from a variety of angles, again, just to make this all the more real. And so it's good. That's a power of alliances, right? That you could get a message across to a variety of audiences, and the information is factual, the information is correct. And so with this type of team that you have together, it definitely has to be listened to and acknowledged. So thank you again. So we have a few more questions here to hopefully, to keep a personal spin on living with HIV/AIDS. And so I think Alice, you might have shared a little bit. I think Ashley, you shared a little bit also, but we'll just open this up to anyone else who wishes to share. It says, how did you learn of your diagnoses? How did you learn that you were HIV positive? And so I know you can raise your hand and we can just move it from there. Ashley, I see you have your hand up first, so go ahead.
Oh, you're on.
They got to take off mute.
You're on mute, Ash.
There you
I'm
go.
sorry.
No problem.
So like I was saying, I knew there was something wrong when I was 6 years old because I would had to take medication. And the medication just tasted nasty. But then like I didn't know why I was getting sick all the time. I was getting with infections. I had to go into surgery a lot as a little child. And when I finally was taken away from my mother and put into a residential at the age of 12 years old, that's when they decided that it was finally time to sit me down and tell me. And I didn't take it hard. I just didn't understand it and what it was. I just knew that if I bled, I couldn't let people touch me. They were more treating me like I was delicate or weak. So that was more my experience, that I was just like the weak one. They were watching me more.
Wow. All right.
I can share my experience as well. I mean, for me, my circumstances were a little bit different in the sense that, I started working in the HIV/AIDS field back in 1996. I was just 18 years old and started as an outreach worker. And I moved to New York, and the other components that that we sometimes forget or we touch base on when we deal with clients is that for me what happened was a moment of sort of facing depression um, and self-esteem issues as a Latino gay male, being heavyset in New York City. Began to use a lot of substance use such as alcohol, and then started engaging in a lot of risky behaviors. And so even though I had worked in the field and I was sort of the one who preached and tested and taught and educated at the age of back in 2008, almost 10 years or more after 12 years after working in the field, I became HIV positive. And so there was also a sense of shame or embarrassment to admit that, especially amongst my colleagues, because then I sort of felt that, almost hypocritical, like, why are you working in the field or educating and then you're doing the exact opposite. But I had to come to terms with, with my behaviors and my depression, my anxiety, and all those other components that put me in those risky behaviors. And so today I'm able to share that, comfortably, and still continue to work in the field, many years afterwards. So that was my experience.
My experience was yet different from either Ashley or Lewis's. I was in a long-term relationship. Actually, I had a partner that I was with for 5 years, and in the interim of our relationship, I, for my part, was monogamous. Learned later that he may not have been, and I ended up testing positive at 19. And when I went, it was kind of shocking for me because quite similar to Alice, I didn't think that I was at risk. Like, I'm one of the most boring people ever. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, like I didn't do it. I was such a boring teenager. I did nothing. But I wanted a relationship. Like I wanted to have someone that I thought loved and cared for me. And I thought this person did. And being with them for a long time, of course, we weren't using protection consistently. And so by the time I got diagnosed, I thought, well, what in the hell did I do so wrong in my life for this to happen to me? Like, I don't understand. And it was hard. There was a lot of self-loathing. There was a lot of rage. I can honestly say that now. I had a lot of rage towards him because I had actually asked him. I had heard some things and some rumors and stuff about him, like after we had started dating. And I don't go on what other people say. I usually go directly to the person, which is what I did. And he blatantly looked me dead in my face and lied to me. And, no, do I look sick? There's nothing wrong. I love you too much. I would never do that to you. All that kind of, bull crap that people say. And then when I tested positive, it was this, oh, I'm sorry, baby. I didn't know if I had it, I wasn't aware. And what's really messed up, y'all, is for my very first doctor's appointment, he went with me. And during the course of that appointment, he let it slip out that he'd actually been on meds before. So although I may have believed him at first that he didn't know because that could happen, he let that slip in the appointment. And I'm telling y'all, if y'all could have seen my reaction in the room. So that was my experience with that.
Wow. It's like when you hear of people, but my experience, 1989, I was married 10 years. I got married really young, 19. We were looking for a house, decided to increase our life insurance. I worked at Aetna, got a letter from Aetna. No, we're not going to increase your life insurance. You got to go see your doctor. Why Aetna? I got a cruise in 2 months. Went to the doctor, which of course Aetna being life insurance, they had already sent my results to my doctor. When I walked in, Alice, you have AIDS, not HIV. You have AIDS. Diagnosis immediately. Ran out the office, went and got my daughters. I was in Kaiser Permanente, which was a one building healthcare center. So I got my kids, brought my daughters back who were 5 and 10, got them tested, they were negative, and somehow I never told my husband ever that I was gonna. I convinced myself it was a false negative, and I would get another test and it would come back correct. I had a cruise to go to, and it would all be okay after the cruise. I was a beast to deal with, and argumentative. Me and my husband separated. Months later, he called me. He was in Hartford Hospital. He wanted me to come see him and to bring the kids. And I'm like, Ricky, why? Well, I brought my oldest daughter. I was leery about it for some reason. Got to the hospital room. The man that was in that bed was a fraction of the man I had married. I mean, if he was 100 pounds wet, this man was a beast. He was husky. And in that bed, he couldn't have been 100. And he had like a trickle of blood coming out his nose. His best friend was sitting in the corner. I couldn't even walk into the room. My daughter, she didn't see anything. She ran to the bed and Daddy, and I couldn't walk in. And I tried to play it off, hey, what's going on? And we stayed and then we left. I paid for a week of TV, went home, 5 a.m. the next morning, and they called, he had died. Excuse me, your husband. I put file that somewhere in the file called shot, and I don't believe it, and called his family in Virginia, told them to come up, went to funeral home, planned the funeral. 20 days later, we closed. I closed on the house, and 6 months after that, my AIDS-related complications began and continued for 10 years after that. No questions answered, nothing. I have no information how, why, when, what. All I know is his death certificate read, renal failure complicated by AIDS. That's all I know. That's all I'll ever know. So, what were your feelings? Anger, rage, that's all. They still there right now. Never really dealt with it. I got that file that I just don't touch. And it's there because, like, immediately after I buried him, the AIDS complication came like fast and furious. It was almost like AIDS was saying, okay, now we gonna get it. And they did. I mean, they came back to back, and that's when I moved into Peter's Retreat, which was an AIDS hospice. There was a waiting list. It was a 28-bed residential place, the only one in Hartford. You went there to die.
Wow.
To die. You did not believe you would get out. My family just told me we're gonna stop paying on the house and taking your kids. And my prayer every night was, God, I have no idea, like Latoya, what I did. What did I do? You've taken my husband. Now my kids are gone. My family did not call me. And my brother was a conservator, so he had to come every month to pay my rent. Family didn't call. I had a best friend that I told, but they more or less cut me off and told my kids I left them. And so, yeah, that's what I raged at the world and God, because I just had no idea. What could I have done? What to deserve not only my husband, my kids, but then I was just medication, AZT I couldn't take. Then I couldn't take. I got to take Nordair, the liquid medication that was gasoline. I'm telling you no lie. It tasted, smelled, and went down like fire. It was gasoline. Doctor said, Alice, I don't care. Whatever you can get in. For whatever reason, I listened. And I took it. And I'm here today because I took it. I had friends at Peter's who I respect fully made the decision I'm not doing it.
Wow.
The medication is worse than dying, and they chose to die.
Wow.
And we woke up morning after sitting at dinner, they were gone. Friends we ate dinner with, they were gone. Over and over and over. 5 years, it just happened. And Barbara, you can share about that because Barbara, I had moved on, but Barbara became the director. I had moved out, but it was a nightmare, but it was my family because my family couldn't handle it. But Peter's Retreat was my family, and even after I moved, I went back. No matter what, I went back because I had to let my family see you can live. You can live, and you're gonna be okay, even though the complications continued after I left. So I thank God because I finally got to a place that I realized there's a reason for it. It took years. Using, and rage. But I now know.
And that's heavy, Alice. That's heavy. Latoya, I see you have your hand up, so we'll go back and give you the floor.
I just want to mention, I have such a deep, deep appreciation and respect for people like Alice and Luis and Ashley who have gotten to a place that they're comfortable with talking about their life and their journey with HIV. Because when I first got diagnosed, I came into the field, as I mentioned, um, before, as a peer advocate. That was my first job ever as a teenager. And the premise at the time for me being a peer advocate was the case managers at the time kind of used me as a prop to go and do home visits with the positive clients who already had an AIDS diagnosis and who were sick and who maybe were getting fatigued, from taking medications, who were tired. And they used me to show the clients that they could be okay and that, they didn't have to just lay down and die. And it wasn't until it was that experience that took me out of this field for a little while, because one, I felt like a complete and utter hypocrite, because those people were dealing with this virus on a level that I had not gotten to a place to possibly comprehend. These people were sick. Their bodies were betraying them. They did not have the mobility and the functioning that they once had. They were not as lively and as spry as they had been. And I felt like the case managers using me in that way was not only unfair to them, because that showed them what they were and how they used to be. And they probably knew that they couldn't get necessarily back to that again. So it was not only fair to them, but it was also unfair to me, because I got out of that field because I was afraid that that would become me. I became very afraid that I would not know how to take care of myself and that I would be one of those individuals. So, you talked at the very beginning, you gave Ashley's bio and you mentioned suicide. I attempted it several times because I thought I didn't want that to happen to me, and I didn't want my family to have to worry about watching me die that way. And I didn't want them to have to be concerned about me in that way. And if I took myself out before I ever got there, I felt like it could be easier on them, And so I have so much respect for folks like this, because this is not an easy life. It is a manageable life now, but it wasn't then. I met a woman in one of my support groups at the time who was taking 28 pills 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I did the freaking math on that, guys.
Yeah.
And I told my doctor, if it ever came down to it, let me die, because I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't, I just knew, because I know me, I was like, I would never be able to do that. So just let me die, let me go. I'll be, my family and I would be fine, because I just knew I could not do that. And it was very hard, very hard. So I have a lot of respect. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you so much. If I may ask, Alice, I heard you say you're at a place, and you said pretty much your family had abandoned you. You lost your husband, your children. They took your children and said, stop paying on your house. And today you're still here. And so I would ask, what is your relationship today with your family, who did leave you at a time? Where are you standing with them today?
Well, we're fine, because I did, I cried. A lot of years I just cried. And my daughters, especially my youngest, she got real mad at me. And she was like, Mom, why are you crying? Don't cry for them. She really hated what they did to me. Because she was like a baby, and I would go to the door and they wouldn't let me in to see my kids. But I had to say, I'm a Christian. I'm a child of the Most High God first. And He says we have to forgive. That's what we're taught. And believe me, it didn't come easy. It came through a lot of, God, I cannot do this. But they did come. And I forgave them after a year of not talking to them at all. But it was like, you know what? I cannot let my kids see me not forgiving because they're still not forgiving. But they had trauma of their own, and I figured I cannot show them how to get through their trauma unless I show them I gotten through mine.
Wow.
And a lot of it was an act. It wasn't real. But I felt like I had to at least try to model, like I model for my peers. In my peer group, I have to set an example because God let me be here. I carry the Spirit. Every person in Peter's, of my husband, of my grandson who was murdered in 2016, who was born when I lived in Peters, who I told staff I just want to live to see him born. There are so many things, so many traumas that God said, nope, you can't go yet. So when I finally realized all of it's out of my control, and I kind of got that, then I have to realize, all right, I have 13 grandchildren. I have one great grandson and a great granddaughter due in March. I have an obligation to them and to the people I hear, the people I navigate. I didn't choose. My daughter says I did before I was born. I'm still working on that I selected this. But I believe God made up this thing for me, and I can get with that. So I'm just trying to live up this mandate God has made for me, and that's how I'm able. If I can say, all right, it's God's doing, not mine, then I can walk it. That's how.
All right. Thank you. Yes. Power of forgiveness. And then it's amazing how you're the one who had to go through the whole ordeal.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, you're the one who has to instigate the forgiveness too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing that type of yoke, that type of burden that God has placed on you, but you're able to walk with it, to live with it, to demonstrate it, and then to, with grace and with class, be able to share, your story. And man, it's powerful. So yeah, I guess, thank you. Yeah, man, I have a ton of questions. We're running out of time. I mean, I have a lot I would like to ask. We don't have that much time left, but I hear you now, Alice, that you're in a place of encouraging others, living a life before others. Latoya, Ashley. So how where are you drawing your strength from? Like, where are you, do you have these times of weakness still? Or are you past this now? Like, I got this, I can handle this, or
To be honest, I have not passed you guys, okay? But I am afraid to date. I am afraid to go out there. I'm not afraid to tell people what I have. I'm just afraid to meet new people, like significant others, to get close to them, or, you know, to be sexual. And, because at the end of the day, you could be with someone and then they'll turn right back and, be like, well, you have HIV, use it against you. I lived with like through that 2 times already, where they've used it against me, where it's put me in a hole where I'm like, I'd rather be by myself, so that I don't have to deal with none of that, because at the end of the day, there's ignorance and there is the stigma, and you don't know who you have right next to you. At the end of the day, you think you know them, but you really don't. But what has made me strong is my kids. Raising them alone, being a single mother, having to divorce my ex-husband in 2019. I told myself that I wasn't going to take it anymore, especially when it came to his family. I just recently had someone, the stigma never ends, I tell you. They told me, I was really close with someone, and I still am, but I let it go. And sometimes you have to let things go in order for you to move on. And to know exactly how people think about you, sometimes it hurts. It really does. Because you think that the person that you are close with, that you look as a mother to, since you didn't have a mother, I didn't have a mother. I had an absent mother. Even if she raised me till I was 10 years old, she didn't love me, and she didn't show me what love was. And I knew love until I had my kids. No one taught me love. All I knew was anger. I knew what to lash out, to fight, and it was my kids. It's my kids that hold me strong. And to find out recently that, someone is afraid of me, of my condition, it tells me that the stigma is never over. And it will never be over. And it could be the closest person to you, and that makes me strong as well, because it makes me know who to stay away from and who to keep going towards too. You know what I mean? Because there are people who will go in my inbox and ask me, hey, I heard this, is this true? And I'd be like, no, don't pay attention to that. That's just ignorance. So I like that, that people are not afraid of me, of who I am. And like I tell everybody, I'm no different than you. I bleed the same. We have the same blood. Just the only thing is I have HIV. That is it. That's my immune system may be weaker than yours, but I still could do everything you do. That has kept me strong. Just when people talk, I say ignorance. I love educating, and I love putting them in their place, because of the fact that you're not gonna tell me something that you think is true, and then I tell you, and then they have their mouth open, like I met my girlfriend's daughter. She went to medical assistant, and it was weird, because you would think that a medical assistant teacher would know her facts and her medical stuff, but clearly no. I remember she had asked me to go to the hospital with her because she didn't feel good. And she was speaking to her mother, and she told her mother, Mom, So herpes turns into HIV. I'm like,
Ooh,
mind you, her
wow.
daughter didn't know that I have it. So my girlfriend looked at me and was like, Ashley, don't you dare, like, with that face, don't you dare. And I let it go and I'm like, no, it's not like that. Who told you that? She was like, yeah, my medical assistant teacher told me that. I was like, no,
Okay.
that's not fact. She was like, no, no, no. Yes, yes, yes. I was like, okay, now listen, I have HIV. I have HIV. She stood shocked, like, what? And that's not the fact. You know, your teacher has to educate herself in order to teach a class, especially for medical. Um, because if you come to anybody that has that, they will be upset, with the facts that that's not true, and when I hear stuff like that, it makes me laugh, but it also makes me like, yes, I'm gonna say this, yes, I'm gonna educate, this is the time to educate, so that when she goes to her teacher, she's able, like, no, that's not true, or if someone ever asks her about HIV, she's able to educate because I educated her, you know. Um, so I'm not stronger than all of y'all. I still have my weaknesses, just the only thing that keeps me strong are my kids. And I noticed that my daughter is getting older and I can't wait till she turns 8 or 9 and I will come out to her and I will educate her, you know, and maybe she can educate all her friends, I feel like I'm blessed with this so that I can educate my kids. And that they can also educate other people as well.
Louis, how about you? I'll let you talk first.
Well, no, for me, I mean, it's for me. I have my days like anyone else, of course, and I go through my emotions, and my for me, my experience was a little bit different because I guess I already had a foundation of understanding HIV and being around HIV that I wasn't really fearful of it. Although, again, I mentioned earlier there was some shame or some embarrassment to then be open about it. But the stigma still exists. I mean, within the gay community, you would think
Yes.
gay men are more open about it, and it's not true.
Yep.
As a single gay male, they one of the derogatory terms they use are "you clean." When they're online, and I'm like, what do you mean? I took a shower. I'm always clean. I don't understand what you're saying. I know
Yes.
what you're saying, but I kind of like just throw it back at them, and I said,
Yeah.
what is that about?
Mm.
And so you still face that, and also from people, even I've encountered people that work, like you mentioned, Ashley, even in the medical fields, I've encountered, and people who do social work that I've encountered who are still have a sense of ignorance about it, or would still have biases, that would
Yep.
say, well, I'll do the service, but I would never date somebody who has that, or never, and it's sort of like a bad thing. What I like about us sharing our stories is that, it does put a face onto it, and it does take away, and hopefully it does take away from the people that are listening that bias away, that we have different ways of contracting it, that it doesn't define who we are. Me having HIV is just a product of the symptoms that I had, and not something that I was out like I'm a dirty person, or it's still associated as though that's a using population issue, that's a gay perverse type of disease, or you're dirty, you're doing bad things and out there, and that's not the case. So but for me, I know having not known the knowledge keeps me strong, keeps me moving forward, and because I love to live, I love to be alive, and I'm always looking forward to another day. And there's so many things in my head that I want to accomplish, that doesn't hinder me.
Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you for
So
that. And
my
live
strength,
well.
my strength used to come from my children
Mhm.
because when I was diagnosed, I wanted to live for them and I chose to live for them. They are almost all grown now. My youngest is 17. And as they were aging, I realized girl, you can't live for them. They about to be grown and gone. They're gonna have their own families. They're gonna have their own children. They're gonna be in their own homes. What you gonna do then? So I decided that was not okay, because once they leave, that means, what do I have to live for, right? And so and I came to that conclusion in my early 20s, early to mid 20s. And so that started me on my self-improvement path, on my path to always becoming and working towards becoming the best Latoya that I can be in this world, and showing up as the best version of me that God will allow. And so I immersed myself in, self-improvement and spirituality and just continuous learning. And I find my strength and my oomph to go just solely based on the fact that, quite similar to Alice, when my mom found out, she turned her back on me, because although I am her only daughter, although I was a teenage girl and I needed my mommy because I didn't know what was going on and I was confused, she didn't know either. And so she didn't know how to be there for me. So I had to figure out on my own how to deal with this. And because I had to find out and figure it out on my own, I figured if I could deal with my mother rejecting me, to heck with everybody else, because they're not in my small space, in my small circle. I don't have to see them every day. I don't have to deal with them on a regular basis. If you don't like me, I don't have to deal with it. You know what I'm saying? So I have very consciously chosen to be the best me that I can be, and to draw strength from the God that I believe in and that I serve, to help carry me through any number of challenges that may come into my path. And so far, he has been very faithful to me as I've tried to maintain to him. I have to say try, because honey, I'm still a work in progress.
No, we all are. We all are.
Yes.
Can I just say one thing that I think is really difficult for everyone? It's probably difficult for a lot more, but in particular, people with HIV, the self-crucifixion
Yes.
that you do
Yes.
far outweighs any
Yes.
stigma, any outside force. What I did to myself,
Absolutely.
I'm still getting over. And in fact, I'm looking for a therapist so serious to undo some of the damage that I've done to myself. I mean, I've got a lot going on as far as positive. I'm very much okay. My grandkids and my daughters, in number, they're on me. But in fact, they're on me. They protect me beyond. But I have a lot of work to do to seal the damage. And a lot of people with HIV, we do that. And we do that because there are times when we just are so stopped on. And then we stomp on ourselves.
Yep.
And so there's a question about what could you do to help? If people could just rally around that one person and be that support, and I don't mean just be a friend. I mean be that support. I have a best friend that has been my best friend. Listen to me when I told her for years and years I wanted to die. She's my best. Telling you that is just something I really try to save my clients from. That's a horrific painful thing we do to ourselves, and it comes from the stigma outside of ourselves, but it's a horrible thing. It really is.
Well, it is,
So-
wow, I don't know, it's 8:28, and so
Um,
we have literally
Yeah.
like gone to
minutes.
capacity with our time. And so,
So
I mean,
can-
Listen, we
Can
could sit here all
Barbara-
day.
Can Barbara throw up her screen, her slides with next steps
resources.
and resources? I think that would be
Yeah, I
helpful.
think Lindsay might be throwing them up, but I would I'll bring everyone's attention to the fact that there's a great listing of all kinds of things, books and films and websites and so forth, because we believe that certainly you can make a difference, certainly by being a friend to people, by being that support to people, as Alice said. The first slide, we say, educate, volunteer, donate, and advocate. And I feel like this quote is a really important quote. And it's really, I think, our challenge to making a difference also. So someday the AIDS crisis will be over. Remember that. And when that day comes, when that day has come and gone, there'll be people alive on this earth, gay people and straight people, men and women, black and white, who will hear the story that once there was a terrible disease in this country and all over the world, and that a brave group of people stood up and fought, and in some cases gave their lives so that other people might live and be free. Vito Russo. I should note that this was said a long time ago. As a matter of fact, he passed in 1990. So that tells you how much more work we have to do. But this forum tonight, I think, was a great start. And so please educate, volunteer, donate, and put yourself on Sean Lang's advocacy list by emailing her. Her email address is on the last page of these slides. We can envision this world if we work together. I think I'll leave it at there.
Mhm.
well, thank you all again for taking the time to share of yourselves, share your story, share your knowledge, and it's been a very humbling experience, a very informative experience, empowering as well. And so I see that she's just going beyond wishing you well, but that you do stay encouraged, that you maintain your faith, and I think it's not just a challenge for you, it's a challenge for every last one of us. I do believe in a time, such as this. And so I just thank you for, just the strength, the encouragement, the vulnerability, and the honesty that you've all been able to share, because I bet I'm not the only one, but I definitely, in each one of you, I heard a little piece of myself and my own life and various experiences that you've been able to overcome. But I could hear a little bit of myself in a lot of your stories and a lot of your experiences. So it always lets me know, no, we're not too far away, we're not too distant, not too different, but maybe just a step away, from something very, very, very similar happen. And I know it's not because it's so good or anything like that, but it's just a step. And so I recognize that and I receive it as well. So on behalf of our Spirit Council, on behalf of Simsbury Public Services, on behalf of the Simsbury Public Library, you just say thank you all again just for joining us. I hope this is not the last time that we are
Right.
able to hear from you. All of our meetings have been via Zoom, and so there will be a time where we will be able to meet, in person and make this all the more real and all the more better of an experience. But in the time being, we are doing the best that we can. And so we just thank you for sharing all over again. So
Thank you.
that being said, it's been such an awesome, blessed conversation and discussion. And just thank you again for having the strength to share. And it's
Thank
greatly
you.
appreciated.
Thank
So,
you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you,
I'm
everyone.
Have a
proud
good
of
night.
God bless.
the organization.
Thank you.
To say good night. Thank you.
Good night.